Demura. This video is up on my website, systemeducation.com, and it's a response to a meeting of the world building group that arose out of a Buckminster Fuller Institute short course on Bucky's ideas on synergetics and related topics. And so the session that I'm commenting on was about thoughts and sort of time banking of thoughts. So this is some stuff related to how Bucky viewed thoughts to complement the discussion, which was excellent. So the basic thing is that thoughts are geometric and they have shape. Therefore, they have an inside and an outside. They're tuned in because our perception tunes into a particular system and a spot in space. When we tune it in, it's a particular scale, if you will, and a particular locale. Now, Bucky would emphasize that a conceptual structure is independent of size, right? So if we abstract from what we're considering in particular, the particularities of the universe, if we abstract the generalized principles, then perhaps, and we're seeing tetrahedrons and polyhedrons, then once again they can scale down in size, which is their frequency increasing, or scale up as the frequency decreases, if you will. But in general, when we tune in, we're tuning into a particular scale and a particular locale. When we tune in, we dismiss the external universe, which he called a tetrahedron, the macro, and also the internal, which he called an internal micro tetrahedron, if you will. So we're dismissing what we call adjacent systems in biomimicry, as well as the outer and inner, at least temporarily. Now, thoughts can become reality in a couple of different ways. And of course, your reality consists of physical and metaphysical. So we're saying external to your reality. When we turned into a physical system, right, which probably means design and testing and putting things together, and also can become more of a metaphysical reality for others when you share it. And more on that in a minute. And really, one of the things that helps this all happen is this idea of processional thinking. And once again, more on that in a minute. And then there are some things here we'll just jump over and look at some things that are in R.W. Gray's synergetics pages. And one of the big pages of R.W. Gray is the combination of synergetics 1 and 2 and linking together of them. So once again in here, 400.71, emphasizing, systems and thoughts have insideness and outsideness, and then what he often calls the star events, which are the corners of the tetrahedron. And actually, those are interconnections with all the external systems, aren't they? So nothing exists independently of it. A couple other thoughts then from Bucky. Once again, we're still here. 510.02. Thinking is the consideration of different experiences and of inherently separate sets of events, and trying to find out what their relatedness is. Aha. So once again, we're sort of tuning in, right? And we're saying, here's these separate sets of events, right? And how are they related? So now he's actually talking about this coupling, isn't he? He's talking about how things are connected together at those corners or stars. In some places, he called those leaky corners. That all polyhedrons, all tetrahedrons have leaky corners. And then leak is that processional energy, information, material that allows coupling. Excuse me. And the figure here then, he goes on for a while in this section about how you could really just imagine this as these starbursts, right? And then it gives you the idea of the energetic sense of universe. So now if we jump to the synergetics cards, which is another resource that R.W. Gray has made available to us. This is a large set of cards that Bucky created at Alpawhite, worked them to come up with a lot of material for synergetics, as I understand this. So then conceptual systems, which is kind of the idea of thoughts, right? And they're always synergetic, which is what we said before. Minimum, maximum sets, thinkable, okay? Omni-interrelevant, which is tuning in, right? Certain things and tuning out, if you will. And then, of course, tuning out, generally speaking, is going very large, right? And tuning in is going to this particular scale. Another card, thought and energy. Thought must be somehow comprehensive to energy, and that's pretty well related to the topic of the last world-building group. And then comprehension, if he comprehends in principle, he rearranges locally in universe by realization of the interactions of principles. Well, this is a pretty hefty concept here, right? It says that once we actually get it, we can actually start to make local realizations and local uh, new models, new designs, if you will. And in particular, they will only really occur if they reflect those generalized principles that underlie all of physical and metaphysical universe. Okay, and then this is from my website, a paper I done many, many years ago, and it just shows that there's different kinds of coupling. You've probably heard of this. There's this nodal coupling, which is more like a gas. Things can quickly go around. And this coupling along an edge or vector, whatever you want to call it, right, where it's swinging back and forth, you might think of it as a liquid. But it shows you that the coupling happens between, in this case, the bee and the flower in two spots. And so this then is the minimum of regenerative universe, right? Where the bee is in search of something, typically nectar, sometimes pollen, but takes away something as well, which is the pollen, and then deposits on the next flower. So this is very dynamic, but this is how a universe regenerates in a very simple way. All right. So then what else can we say? Bucky emphasized that if we wanted to create a new world, we create a new model and work on that. So we don't fight the existing model, the existing forces. We create a new model and start to put energy into it. And so, of course, that starts with thought, doesn't it? And that we're then going to want to connect that model up to existing systems and interconnections. So we can't ignore that stuff, I mean, in some cases, communities try and separate themselves from the external systems as much as possible to allow their internal connections to be free of all that stuff. And that has some validity. And of course, we disconnect ourselves right from existing systems when we meditate and go into nature and take vacations. Now, what about the value of thoughts? Well, there's value to the thinker, right, because it helps them figure out how to what I call navigate or move their way through universe, if you will. Also to understand the forces and the coupling that are out there. On the subject of which you're thinking, it's going to improve potentially connections and visibility, right, especially as you communicate your thought of this system, this geometric, if you will, structure. And then in the world, as you have these thoughts and work and act on them and communicate them, you're weaving things together, coupling things together, doing more of sensing and what I call valving, which is sort of how we control the flow of things. So more on designs in another short thing. But to make this work, this vision, this thought needs to be shared, doesn't it? And not just shared, but modified by the other, right? Because before we can make anything in universe, it's got to have multiple points of view, work on it together, that sort of thing. And then obviously acted upon. How do we act upon it? Well, we can generate what are called strategies, and every example in Ask Nature, which is used by bio-inspired designers, they go and say, how does nature regenerate? How does nature respirate? How does nature protect? Every example then has a strategy of how the organism accomplished this. And that strategy is often then viewed metaphorically and transferred back into our world of design and non-living systems. So strategies are an important thing. As we put things together, we have to consider both the tension and the compression. There's tension and compression, right, when that bee comes up to the flower and collects the pollen and nectar. And then, as that illustration showed, processional pairs, right? So we can't just extract all the time, because we know what happens, right? If we just extract from the earth, suck it out, and never give it back, guess what? So now, related ideas of the world game, and you probably know that in the world game, Bucky said, have this great directory of resources, both physical and metaphysical, and know-how, work out strategies, think comprehensively, and when they were good enough, right, he felt when a good enough strategy was developed, it would sort of just take off. And of course, we know by now that there are other forces involved in the world that may, try and limit it, right? They may be controlling a particular thing with their feedback loops. So we need to find kind of a different conception, different level, so that we don't fight them, but instead we make it work spontaneously, as he would say, for the maximum number of people. The Design Science Lab is a similar thing. Everybody should have one. Bucky had it. There's some great stuff on the Bucky Fuller Institute website about the practices in a Design Science Lab. And we're continually scanning, right? We're separating ourselves in time and space to allow that, right? To allow that thinking, that conceptual tuning into these sort of things. And then, of course, we each have our own toolboxes. And once again, more on that in another lecture. And then, once again, back to it, what makes it all work? Procession makes it all work. These leaky corners, the fact that I'm spewing something out, and maybe you're listening to it, getting something from it, and you'll give me feedback. That's processional coupling, right? Because there's two things going on. If I'm just going out in the universe, nobody hears it, and nobody gets back to me, well then, eventually maybe you'll find a listener, and that's good. But it's much better, right, if I have a community to give me feedback and critique. So that's it. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you soon.